Alright everybody, just kind of an impromptu video here for the NSO edition of GoldeneyeSwitch 007. Just looking at the controls, looking at what we got here. So I have the NSO edition Bluetooth Brawler here. And as far as emulation quality goes, it's not the worst I've ever seen, but it's definitely interesting to say the least. But it's definitely gets the job done, it's passable. But I'm noticing some weird things in the controls regardless of what controller you use to play it with. Like, the steppings don't seem as smooth as when you emulate N64 on PC or play on a real N64, and that really reflects in how the game handles regardless of any controller I've used. So you can see that it's just kind of jumpy. And this in turn reflects in fine aiming, like it just kind of skips way far over even with the slightest input. Like, look at that. It's kind of nuts. Now, the dead zone on the NSO Brawler definitely does play a contributing factor in the early aiming, but not this. Not that jump. Like, that's hecka funky. But anyway, today we are looking at specific control options for GoldeneyeSwitch real quick. So here we do have the RetroFighters Bluetooth Brawler. And I was concerned about the diagonals being oversensitive, because that's how it works on PC, so I figured it probably used a similar profile on Switch. Turns out that's not quite the case, and the diagonals are actually behaving quite well, as you would expect of them. Except for the left side. That's when things don't quite work right. And we don't get any turns at all. So, fascinating stuff. Interesting to see these results. Now, as for RetroBit's V2 wireless tribute's performance in GoldeneyeSwitch 007, things are a little bit better. Like, the controller itself is able to kind of compensate for that increased stepping in the game. Like, you can see that it still happens. But, I don't know, it's a little bit easier to manage with the bigger thumbstick in my opinion, but it is still there. So it's just something that I think is a part of this emulated ROM, unfortunately. This isn't exactly a deep technical analysis, of course, just kind of casual observations. But at least diagonals are working pretty well as well with the V2 Tribute on NSO. Not as good as on PC, mind you, but it still gets the job done. But these right diagonals are kind of problematic for this one, whereas left was problematic for the Bluetooth Brawler, so it's kind of weird, isn't it? Like, it mostly works, but oh well. Not quite perfect, but a bit better than the Bluetooth Brawler in most regards. Now for our good old friends, the Joycons. So, everyone complaining about this game not having modern control setups. Hey, guess what? Turn your control settings over to 1.2 Solitaire and live a happy life, and stop complaining about bad controls, because how do you get more modern than actual modern aiming controls? You might want to swap the sticks unless you can play Southpaw, but I do play Southpaw, so hey, it's very modern. But Joy-Cons are very curious here, so doesn't feel outrageously oversensitive in most regards, but can get a little that way if you're not prepared for it. But then manual aiming, we've got pretty decent control on the axis. But hey, finding those diagonal ranges that work is kind of iffy. Look at that, it struggles! Who would have guessed that a Joy-Con would struggle with diagonals in GoldeneyeSwitch? Gets the job done, but I definitely prefer the Brawler and Tribute 64 over this, just for manual aiming sense, not even going into other Joy-Con nonsense. Now, as for our friend, the SwitchProCintroller here, things are kind of similar to the Joy-Cons, but a little bit better. So, first thing to note is that the steppings are still a bit problematic compared to how they should be. So that is, again, just on every controller, regardless of which ones you use. But doesn't feel quite as oversensitive as the Joy-Cons in just traditional movement. Again, if you want modern controls, change over to 1.2 Solitaire. And then you can swap the sticks in the software menu if you need to, but anyway. Moving on to manual aiming, we have pretty good control on the absolute axis. And then diagonals are a little bit better than the Joy-Cons. Still not as good as a traditional N64 controller on real hardware, but it gets the job done well enough that this is definitely a viable option. But yeah, diagonal aiming is always just going to be problematic for this game. But yeah, overall, I think that this does a pretty good job. I wish that this version of the game didn't feel so ridiculously sensitive in its aiming, but that is not an issue that is present in PC emulation. And I need to remember my button layouts. But yeah, see, like, fine aiming is definitely problematic. Really? Really? You're just gonna take that bullet to the head like a champ. Good on you, man. But anyway, this is just my brief control breakdown. I wish I had the NSO N64 controller to show off, but unfortunately I don't. Those are unobtainium. So, between all four controller options that I've shown today, I probably would stick with either a Pro Controller or the RetroBit V2 Tributes, personally. I think those give you the best in-game performance. So, yeah, that's all I really got here. So, hope you find this somewhat informative, and let's just go enjoy GoldenEye. It's a 25-plus-year-old classic.